Israel's cabinet approves a draft law defining the nation as a Jewish state. Critics say it threatens the country's democratic foundation, but how does it differ from constitutions of its Muslim neighbors? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Mike Hanna. It's a bill stirring fierce debate in Israel and among politicians themselves. A proposed law that defines Israel as the national homeland of the Jewish people, granting individual rights for all citizens, but national rights only for Jewish people. Rights groups have condemned the draft legislation as racist and say it discriminates against Israel's minorities, which make up 20% of the population. The cabinet vote comes at a time of heightened tensions with Palestinians. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the bill is necessary because people were challenging the notion of Israel as a Jewish homeland.
The State of Israel is the nation-state of the Jewish people. It has equal individual rights for every citizen, and we insist upon this. But only the Jewish people have national rights, a flag, anthem, the right of every Jew to immigrate to the country, and other national symbols. These are granted only to our people in its one and only state.
The final wording of the bill has yet to be approved and requires approval by the Knesset or Parliament. It's intended to become part of Israel's basic law and would recognize Israel's Jewish character, institutionalize Jewish law as an inspiration for legislation, and dropping Arabic as a second official language. Justice Minister Tzipi Livni is among those opposed to the proposed law. In a statement, she said, "I reiterate that Israel is a Jewish and democratic state. I will defend the values of the State of Israel as determined in the Declaration of Independence and will not allow them to be harmed. I support a constitution that anchors these values, and I will oppose any procedure or law that distorts them." So an issue stirring debate over politics and religion, the state and democracy. Let's now bring in our guests. In Jerusalem, Jeremy Sultan, former Knesset candidate and supporter of the right-wing party, the Jewish Home. In New York, Ahmed Tibi, Palestinian member and deputy speaker of the Israeli Knesset. And in London, Jeff Haynes, associate dean and professor of politics at London Metropolitan University. Welcome to you all. Let's begin with Jeremy Sultan. Among the critics of this legislation is the country's Attorney General, Yehuda Weinstein, who describes this bill as not only undemocratic, but also as anti-Zionist. Your view of that point?
I respect the Attorney General's position in terms of his opinion of this bill. However, when it comes to defining the Jewish aspect of the Jewish and democratic state, that's something that the legislative body needs to have its say. Until now, since 1948, the legislative body of the Knesset has not yet said what it means to be a Jewish and democratic state, and I think it's about time that we go ahead and decide what it is that we exactly are.
Well, Ahmed Tibi, your view of this legislation?
For the last 25 years, according to the basic law, Israel is defined as a Jewish and democratic state. Jewish before democratic, it's not accidental. And we said all the time that there is a pure contradiction between the two values. If you are a democratic, you believe and you act equally among all citizens. But if you are defining the state in an ethnic definition like Jewish, you are definitely saying that any Jewish citizen is superior to non-Jewish. Jeremy is superior to Ahmed because he is Jew and because I am Arab Palestinian. I cannot accept it. Now, according to the new bill led by Prime Minister Netanyahu, the Jewish value of the state is overruling the democratic value, as to say that Jewish and democratic was a fiction, exactly as we said, and converting the state or making the state eudocracy, ethnic democracy, Jewish democracy, not an absolute democracy for the whole citizens of the State of Israel.
Well, let's go to Jeff Haynes in London. Your opinion of this bill?
I think it depends on who's looking at this issue. The issue for many of the ruling party and of the government is to make their own electoral prospects better in the next round of elections. From the Palestinian point of view, it looks very much, and the Arab point of view, it looks very much like an arbitrary division between peoples making first and second class citizens. And from an international perspective, I think it makes Israel less of a card-carrying member of the democratic group of nations. I don't believe that's the intention of the legislation, but I think that's how it will be perceived from the outside.
Well, Ahmed Tibi, critics have also contended that the basis of this bill is not necessarily religious, that it is in fact political, that there's a strong political motive from the Israeli Prime Minister to push for this kind of legislation with elections happening within the Likud party early in January. Your view of that point?
Yeah, I can agree with that, because for the last 2 weeks, Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, is shifting totally to the extreme right. Before 3 weeks, he threatened the Arab citizens of the State of Israel to leave, to be expelled to Gaza, and then he again threatened them to have their citizenship revoked because they demonstrated against the state, as he said. And now he is bringing this ultra-radical and extreme nationalistic bill as to say that this minority, which composed 20% of the population, who were indigenous and still indigenous population, indigenous people, are guests that can be gifted by citizenship or by some rights compared to the Jewish majority, but not full citizens of the State of Israel. That's why we are saying that Jewish and democratic state, this is oxymoron. It cannot go together. It should be democratic state, and Netanyahu is targeting that because he has a competition with the right-wing coalition leaders, Lieberman, Naftali Bennett, and in these competitions, usually the victim is the minority, is the Arab Palestinian minority, and their little rights that they are benefiting. And I would like to say that there is no one field in our lives in the state that there is equality between Jews and Arabs. Land allocation, infrastructure, budgets, employment, education, culture. There is a huge gap between Jews and Arabs.
Let me just, if I may interrupt you there, Ahmed, apologies for interrupting. I'll come back to you on that particular point, but I just want to go to Jeremy Sultan with that question. What motivated Benjamin Netanyahu to introduce this legislation? Is it political? Is it indeed a political motive behind introducing this bill?
Well, first of all, I'm going to have to disagree with Ahmed Tibi. I think that it is very possible to have both a Jewish and a democratic state. That's exactly what the Prime Minister is trying to do here. He's trying to go ahead and define what is Jewish, what is democratic. We've been a country since 1948, and as I said in the beginning of the program, the time has come for us to really define that. Actually, if you read the bill, you see that the status of minorities, such as Arabs, will actually go up as a result of this bill. We're still living off the British mandate that says that English, Hebrew, and Arabic have equal footing, but we never, as an Israeli parliament, said what our feeling is in terms of languages. That means that today there are government services, government ministries that are not provided in Arabic. This bill will actually make Ahmed Tibi's life better by going ahead and providing those services in Arabic. I suggest that MK Tibi actually reads the version of the bill that's on the table.
Well, Ahmed Tibi, there are actually a number of versions of the bill that are on the table at the moment. But your response to that, your immediate response?
Yeah, some versions are talking about downgrading the status of the Arab languages. There is another version which does not relate to the status of the language, that of Tzipi Livni. But as all this bill is denying the collective political rights of the Arab minority in Israel. He is saying that collective rights and national rights are only for Jews. He said it in the cabinet yesterday. I am a citizen, but I have identity, national identity. We are not disconnected from our nation. We are Arab Palestinians and we are citizens. We would like to develop both the national identity and the civic status. We want to struggle to be equals. We are not equals, but here he is threatening, attacking aggressively the national identity of the Arab minority, and he is talking about personal rights of Arab citizens, even though there will be no equal terms and equal conditions for Jews and Arabs, even according to this bill. It enlarging the gap between Jews and Arab and adding a basic law talking about the state as a Jewish and not democratic.
Well, I will come back to
the discrimination.
I will come back to Jeremy Salton in a moment, but Jeff Haynes, who's been sitting quietly listening to all of this, what we do have here is a distinct change in the phrasing of a basic law that has been in existence since Israel came into existence. The new wording, national homeland of the Jewish peoples, the old wording, Jewish and democratic state. Now, on the face of it, this is quite a substantive difference. As the Israeli Attorney General has pointed out, he says in the new version, it is separating out the concepts of Jewish and democratic and doing no good to either. Your view of that position?
I think it's a decision, it's a view which seems to have logic behind it in political terms, because the commonality of the democratic experience of all the citizens of Israel is becoming less and less over time. As Ahmed Tibi pointed out, the rights of the Arab citizens of Israel is perceived by them at least as diminishing over time. There is a rampant political right wing in Israel now which has the balance of power, which is much more powerful than in the past, is able to call the shots about how one regards democracy to some extent. And there's a logic behind the notion of a Jewish democracy for Jewish people, with the inevitable corollary that other people are regarded as lesser. This may not be the intention of the drafters of the legislation, but that's very much how it will be perceived by the Arab citizens of Israel, by Arabs outside Israel, and by the international community. So it seems to me to be a question of, do the political right wing in Israel call the shots about basic political rights and issues, or do they have a view which is much more consensual, which aims to bring in all Israeli citizens into a commonality? This seems to move away from that.
Jeremy Salton, to kind of summarize here, the core issue, it would appear from the criticism, is that this legislation actually codifies discrimination against Palestinian Israelis and indeed the Christians who live in the country. Your view?
You know, again, if you go ahead and you read the bill, there's definitely a lot that has to be said in terms of, you know, this being the national home state of the Jewish people, but there's not one word in the entire bill that talks about discrimination towards Arabs, towards Christians, towards Muslim, towards anybody. I can tell you, I live in Mevaseret Zion. My Arab neighbors in Abu Ghosh, they live right next to me. I did not speak to one of them that had a problem with this bill. Again, when I'm listening to what MKTB is talking about, he's talking about versions of the bill that are no longer on the table. If you look at the Prime Minister's version, it is about halfway between what was proposed from the Bayit Yehudi and the Israel Beitenu parties, and on the other side, what was proposed by Tzipi Livni and Yair Lapid of the Yesh Atid party. This is also something that is the beginning of the legislative process. It has not yet come to the Knesset floor. I'm sure MK Ahmed Tibi will have plenty of time to discuss this when it gets into the committee, but we're very, very far from this being the final version of what the bill is going to be. And like I said, there is not one word discriminating against anybody. It is just clarifying the pillars of which this state was built on, and that is what is the definition of Jewish and what is the definition of democratic.
And yet there's a disagreement among Israelis themselves, particularly among Jewish Israelis, as to what is the difference. And Ahmed Tibi, I mean, here's a key question too. Is this going to threaten the Netanyahu coalition? You've got two senior members of that coalition coming out vigorously against the concept of altering the country's basic law. Is this going to backfire on the Netanyahu administration?
Yeah, this disagreement of Yair Lapid and Tzipi Livni is the proof for what I am saying about the nature of this bill. But yes, this is a real threat to the coalition of Mr. Netanyahu. That's the reason why he is delayed. He postponed the vote on this bill. Instead of day after tomorrow, he decided now to postpone it maybe to the next week in order to try to settle the rift in his coalition. I am not sure that meanwhile he has a majority for this bill. He is working on that. That's why he is postponing it in order to prevent the falling down of his coalition, which is the main reason why Mr. Netanyahu is bringing such bill and giving such extreme statements in the last weeks. The polls are not doing well with him, and they are doing well with the national, with the Jewish Home Party, and he is willing to have to gain more points in the right wing, and we are paying the price, and the value of democracy is paying the price for that.
Well, Jeff Haynes, I just want to broaden this out a little bit and take a look at Israel's neighbors. Now, many of them actually define themselves as Islamic states. Egypt's constitution, for example, declares very clearly that the principles of Islamic law are the principal source of legislation. Now, they would argue very strongly that it is possible to be a self-defined Islamic state and a democratic one, just as some within Israel argue that it is possible to be a self-defined Jewish state and a democratic one. Your view of that?
I don't think it's accurate to say that Egypt would call itself an Islamic state. It would call itself a state whose key laws and whose key political direction is defined by Islamic law.
Point taken.
But it doesn't mean to. Point taken. It doesn't mean to say, of course, that. Yeah, but it doesn't mean to say, of course, that the Coptic Christians, for example, in Egypt, are denied equality of rights with the Muslim majority. So I suspect that we're talking about two slightly different things here, and we're talking about a version of Jewishness in Israel, which is very much defining a sense of nationalism. We're not talking about the same kind of thing in Egypt, where Islam defines an Islamic identity to the exclusion of other minority peoples, Christians in particular.
Well, Jeremy Salton, your response to that point, the definition of Jewish state is one about Jewish nationalism, not about Jewish religion.
I don't think that this bill says anything about Judaism as a religion. There's not one aspect of the bill that talks about it. It's Judaism as nationality, as a race. And I think it's very interesting, as you pointed out, where we have a situation where you have a bunch of Middle East states that are defining themselves as Islamic states, as Arab states, and yet the one state that has a Jewish majority in the entire globe everyone is telling us that that is an issue to call ourselves Jewish when we've not yet even defined what it is that Jewish is. And of course, you have the Netanyahu demand of the Palestinian Authority that they go ahead and accept us as the Jewish state. And we know that Abbas has an issue with this, and we know that they expect us to recognize them as the state that they want. It would be nice if everyone accepted us as the state that we want. And we still have quite a bit of internal discussion, and we're going to do so in the Knesset committees to define what it is that we believe is Jewish and what it is that we believe is democratic.
Ahmed Tibi, your view of that, the whole issue of Jewish nationalism as opposed to a basis on the religion of Judaism?
You said, sir, that some Arab states or some Islamic states are defined as an Islamic state, like Iran, for example, and Israel maybe wants to do the same or has the right to do the same. But Israel is preaching for the whole world as to be a Western democracy. The control group and the state that should be a comparison with is France, Sweden, Norway, real democracies. The gap and the difference is huge between the democracies in Scandinavia, for example, or Israel as an ethnocracy, which lead three kinds of rule. One is democracy for 80% of the population, for the Jewish majority. Second is racial discrimination for 20% of the population, Arab Palestinian citizens. And the third is occupation and apartheid in the Palestinian land occupied at 1967. This is not a democracy. The world should act and relate to the state of Israel according to these three types of rule, not according to the first rule as to say that Israel is indeed a Jewish and democratic, but it is a democratic towards Jews and the Jewish towards Arabs, and the difference is great.
Well, Jeff Haynes, the United States, for example, France, for example, have been rigid in separating out religious and political authority. Some wars have been fought on this particular issue. The fundamental discussion point, it would appear, is defining a state in religious terms undemocratic? Is it possible to have Islamic state and democratic state, Jewish state and democratic state in the same breath? Can religion and democracy coexist nationally?
Well, the experience of the modern world is that no, they can't. The experience of the modern world is that the way that religion is used, as potentially would be used in Israel with this bill if it becomes law in its strong version, is necessarily to discriminate against those of a different religion. It's the point I think about religion as a defining characteristic of a political regime is that it necessarily excludes those of a different religion. It's taken the West 500-600 years to get to a point where we have an often uneasy relationship between the political worlds and the religious worlds. And the modus vivendi here is that both sides live separately, with the dominance coming from the political side. The Western model, if I can call it that, is one which subjugates religion to politics, for the very good reason that democratic politics is a way of bringing in all peoples, all citizens in a political environment, on a principle of equality. No religious state has that potential because no country in the world is 100% of one religious faith. And even if it was, then of course you would have the divisions within religions, which are always profound and manifold, as in Israel or as in Egypt, which would be a very problematic area of defining any kind of democratic politics. My view then is that religion and politics coexist, but in a framework which allows both sides to be separate from each other, with a political domination coming from the secular side. No religious state, in my view, can be democratic.
Well, it's a debate that will continue, but my thanks to our guests, Jeremy Salton, Ahmed Tibi, and Jeff Haynes. And we're always interested to hear your views on this Inside Story. You can post your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story or contact us on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. I'm Mike Hanna. Thanks for watching, and goodbye for now.